In this module, I build on the concepts and methods on visualization of demographic data that are contained in Appendix 1 of Biodemography. Specifically, I present technical details and design best practices in graphics. I will start with best practices concerning tick marks and grid lines. Scales divide axes into increments of equal length and assign quantitative measures. It's best to place these on the outside so the inside is free of all but the data values. You should use natural increments such as 0, 5, 10, 15, and so forth. Do not use, for example, increments such as 0, 3, 6, 9, and so forth. If an important line stands apart from others, then use bold or color, such as red, to represent this most important line. Another important characteristic of all graphs is with respect to their aspect ratios. These equal the ratio of length to width, which is to say the length of the x-axis relative to the height of the y-axis. Here are 3 example graphs with different aspect ratios, including one with an aspect ratio of 1, another with an aspect ratio of 2, and a third with an aspect ratio of 3. These lines show the ratios visually. Each of the 3 black lines at the bottom are the lengths of the 3 x-axes and can be seen relative to the length of each of their y-axes in red. An optimal universal aspect ratio does not exist because of 2 considerations for decision making on best aspect ratio for a particular data set, including graphic pattern and main emphasis. So consideration 1, the graphic pattern. These 3 graphs show the same data in different aspect ratios, including 7.6, 0.75, and 1.9. The question is, how do we determine the optimal aspect ratio for graphing this particular data pattern? The rule of thumb for determining the best aspect ratio for this type of data is referred to as banking at 45 degrees, where the orientation of line segments in the chart is equal to 45 degrees. In this hypothetical case, the aspect ratio of 1.9 would be the optimal aspect ratio. Consideration number 2 is with respect to main emphasis of a repeating pattern. So here is the pattern of data which shows the cyclicity and variation. However, the same data, when the cycle is expanded, shows the difference in within cycle slopes, with a slow increase but a rapid decrease each cycle repeat. So in this case, the best aspect ratio for emphasizing the former characteristic would be 1.5, whereas for the emphasizing the difference in increasing and decreasing slopes would be an aspect ratio of 3. In other words, graphing the same data require different aspect ratios depending on emphasis. In this next series of graphs, I will illustrate best practices in selected concepts for graph construction. The first is to label the lines directly, if possible, rather than to use a key. For example, these are labeled directly to eliminate the need for viewers to dart back and forth between a key and determine which line that corresponds to a particular label in the key. Another graphical concept is to separate x and y axes when the y-axis intersection is not 0. For example, separate them like this so that where the y-axis is visually does not touch the ground, so to speak. Another concept is what is referred to as the ink to data ratio. In this case, the grid lines are unnecessary because they create clutter. The same graph can be presented more cleanly with clutter removed, like this, and include the exact values of the minimum and maximum. Another best practice concept is to unburden densely labeled figure axes, such as in this case. There are far too many numbers on the x-axis. This is not only not needed, but creates confusing clutter. A better concept is to focus on the trend by eliminating scale detail to reduce the number of labels on the x-axis. Use hollow circles as robust symbols. For example, symbols are not easily separated visually, in this case, using circles and triangles. The same data points depicted by triangles can be replaced with hollow circles so that they clearly stand apart visually. Use conclusions as chart titles. For example, in this case, the title Sex-Specific Mortality in the Medfly is accurate. However, the title Mortality Crossover in Male and Female Medflies is not only accurate, but is also precise, engaging, and informative. Graph background should be uniform. The shaded box in this case is simply clutter. Plots should be clean and shaded or colored boxes avoided. Do not group incongruent information on one slide. In this example are two qualitatively different groups of information: population traits and largest cities. This is not only far too much information on a single slide, but these categories of information are incongruent and need to be presented on separate slides. A related example is shown here, where you have multiple graphs are included on a single slide, but each graph needs to be presented on a separate slide. This ends this module, in which I covered selected technical aspects of graphical construction and presentation.